The CYENS Weekly, an industry pundit podcast about the tech and innovation of the 21st century. An open discussion between industry experts to uncover how emerging technologies can help solve current societal issues.
Hi, today we have Ray Pinto with us from Digital Europe. We're here at the Digital Europe offices. Thank you for having us here.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Thanks. Thanks for joining us again. Can you please tell us a bit about what you do here at Digital Europe?
Of course, I'm a director of what we call digital transformation. I'm a policy director, and we have noticed, as all our members, that digital will play a very important and impactful role in making industries to be more sustainable. So a lot of my job and my team is to work with the officials creating important policy regulations across the EU so that industries can take up these technologies in a safe way, in a sustainable way, where it respects, security and privacy, and to do what it's supposed to do, which is reduce energy consumption as well as resource consumption and cut waste, and essentially will drive down greenhouse gas emissions, which is a very important thing to do.
And what are some ways of doing each of these?
There are many ways. We have noticed, and we are working very closely with experts as well as officials, that there are industries that are driving greenhouse gas emissions, that are contributing to climate change. But it's not only that. If we look very carefully, a lot of the industries are also creating pollution, which is causing life-threatening or issues with health. It is causing massive disruption in efficiencies, where you're unable to feed your population because your supply chain is not efficient enough, or your agriculture is unable to provide the food due to climate change. Agriculture is one clear area that is energy intensive. It's also resource intensive. It consumes a lot of water and energy and material to grow food. And there are ways to ensure that the people in the agricultural industry can grow that food far more efficiently. Less cost for them, less waste in the world, less resources being consumed. I'll give you an example. If you look at some of the research projects that have been happening over the past 5 to 10 years, we've been using certain technological trends that are driving down the need for the most important commodity that we'll see in the next 5 to 6 years, which is water. And you may not know this, but every grain that is planted into the ground has a serial number to it. And that serial number will tell you exactly how much water and humidity and sun and different soil to make that seed to grow into a crop. So if you take that information and you tie it into a cloud space on a server that will analyze the weather patterns over the next 10 days, where we can today pretty much have a largely accurate figure about the delivery of precipitation or rainfall in any given area, then you tie that information into an AI algorithm, and your water producing machine, a tractor or whatever you use, can drop the exact amount of water that individual seed will need.
Wow.
So what you have from the results of many projects is at least 50% less use of water, and at least 3 times more of crop yield. So that is just a very simple area.
Wow, and what stage is that now? I mean, is it used Europe-wide, or is it just at the testing phase currently?
I'm glad you asked that. There are every day entrepreneurs across the EU that are taking these technology, intellectual property right solutions. They're working with R&D, and they're trying to build businesses to scale it up. However, It is very difficult to do that in the EU. In fact, it's almost impossible. Why? Because in any given member state, there is a very high level of paperwork, of taxes, very difficult rules and regulations for entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. They struggle to get money, international money, because a lot of investors are scared away by this high level of regulation. And most importantly, in between all the member states, there is massive amounts of fragmentation. There's different rules between different countries. And in fact, if you look at healthcare, there is different rules even locally. Your local hospital will have to apply different rules on how data is used to even the regional or the national level, and everything is disconnected. So if you're trying to build a business based on these variables, unfortunately what happens is they leave Europe and they go elsewhere. They go to America, right? And we need to, definitely part of my role, we need to work very closely with the officials to address this, to make sure that data can flow freely in the EU. And we need to also address some other important priorities, if I may be able to tell you them.
Sure.
We have outlined in a paper that you can find on our website, which we call Digital Action, Climate Action. And in that paper, we outline 8 accelerators that will address the digital capabilities, get these technologies to scale, get these SMEs to grow in Europe, and scale their businesses across the world. And these 8 accelerators are priority areas that we in the industry believe, and we've had many officials agree with us, that we should focus on in the coming decade. The first area is you will never succeed unless you set KPIs, key performance indicators, and the European Commission has done that, right? It's now setting hard targets of where and how industries need to adopt these technologies. The other important area is that you need to make sure that there's connectivity. You can have the most beautiful train on the planet, but if there's no tracks for it to roll, then you're not going anywhere. So we have to make sure that countries are embracing 5G, they're rolling it out, we have faster broadband, and we have broadband and accessibility to technology anywhere, even the remote regions of Europe. And then we need to look at standardization. We need to make sure that the standards are international and that the companies can grow internationally. If there's a different standard in Cyprus and then another one in France and another one, in Munich and another one in Denmark, then it will be impossible to have your product to be interoperable or to function in a correct way. So it's great that Europe is producing standards, but they have to be harmonized, and they have to be harmonized internationally. And then I think one area you'll firmly agree to me is the access to R&D, right? We need funding there. We need spending to be placed in the right way. We need to look at the 4 areas where you're going to see the fastest deliverables and return on your investment, right? So if you look at the most energy intensive industries that are producing carbon emissions, I already mentioned agriculture. The other one is buildings, right? So you need to make sure that your buildings can be monitored, and sensors are very cheap. You can put sensors anywhere. You plug that into a cloud system and you're able to visualize the energy production, see where people are using space or not using space. You have buildings that can speak to you, shut off leaks, tell you about predictive maintenance, right? You're already driving massive reductions, not only in cost, but in all the needs that a building requires, which are very high. Buildings produce about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, as well near that amount in energy consumption. Big area that has to be addressed. Besides that, then you have transport. And transport can be delivered, in a very clean and efficient way. You can have traffic redirected in the right way through technology. You can accelerate autonomous vehicles. You can have renewable energies powering, your cars, so it's less dependent on fossil fuels. There's a wider range of things you can do in transport, just to make the whole mass transport system in a city function properly. It's digital, right? And then a fourth area, and there's probably many other areas where you can reduce these technologies. It's your energy systems. So your energy systems are using what we like to term as grid power systems. But these grid systems, they're not smart today. They struggle to connect with other countries, and they struggle to connect to the devices, to the cars, to the homes, and it becomes very fragmented again in the energy market. Technologies can make sure that your washing machines is selling, or interacting with the grid at low points during the day. Energy companies struggle, especially power producers, in producing energy that is needed in society, and then making sure there is a redundant level, a double amount. So in case there's a failure or a blackout, there's always a backup system. So digital technologies can make sure that energy producers have a very accurate view on what is needed exactly. So I think if you listen very carefully to what I'm saying, the one common thread across all these different areas is digital, right? Another accelerator that we need, and this is probably one of the toughest, believe it or not, is skills. And it's easier said than done, to try and improve the skills needed. But every single part of the digital economy and industries is struggling to find people that are not only skilled to create those technologies, but also the ability to use those technologies. Now, many of these technologies are going to be very intuitive, like your phone, right? You don't need to be a programmer to understand how to use your phone or how to send an email, right? They're becoming incredibly intuitive. And that has been a major move by the technology industry over the past 20 years. Where we struggle is now, if you look at just cybersecurity alone in the EU, there is over 200,000 open job positions. So this becomes very difficult to get the right people to be able to start producing, that technology that you need to counter cybersecurity attacks and to make, infrastructure, transport, energy grids safe and secure. So that will mean not only changing the curriculum in each of the member states, but the member states have to come together and make sure that their curriculum is harmonized across the EU and the right curriculum to make sure that our young people are getting the skills they need to be relevant. And this means moving away from multiplication tables or doing things by rote, but to have lifelong skills, to be able to work in teams, to be able to problem solve, to be able to think for yourself, and to be able to be creative, right? These are things that our systems need to do, and they also need to make sure that science, math, and technology are important priorities in the education system, and make it fun. Make it fun. Our education system is far too much geared towards men, right? You will have an education system that are hundreds of years old, created by men, and not making it fun to do math or science or technology if you're a young girl. And we need to change that. We need to make sure that it's inclusive and that we're driving up the gender balance, not only to make sure that we're not excluding women, but there's tremendous value that women bring into the software development community and technology development community.
Wow. I mean, you have the whole plan. You have the whole plan. It sounds like it. So, listening to you, you mentioned the stuff about agriculture, transportation. One common thing that came to my mind, to be able to do all that, sensors, yes, that's data. So you collect the data, and you mentioned about the policy. So you make sure that there's policy to support that data can be shared and interconnected with other resources. And this needs to be Europe-wide. And one thing that actually I had a highlight on was smart housing systems, because to decrease the efficiency, you can use those, especially in big buildings. The smart systems now are more like luxury to have in your house, more than necessity. But when you think of all these policies coming in place in the long term, having the smart house system in a hospital, let's say you start cooling it down before the sun rises, so you use less energy before the place is very heated, or somebody forgets to set it up based on data that it takes from the weather station or the weather forecast, etc. So I see the connectivity there, and skills is coming up everywhere. I don't think we'll have time to dig into deep on each one of the accelerators that you mentioned, because I know there's a lot of European effort in all of them, like girls in ICT, supporting skills, like we had interviewed other colleagues on the digital skills and jobs. So it is very exciting to see the whole, the work you do with planning this whole umbrella, that everything matches, and there's, most importantly, the KPIs to reach.
And yeah, thank you. And if I can just maybe leave one thought to your listeners, is that technology has to be responsible. We need to make sure we're not contributing to the problem, right? We take that very seriously. If you look at data centers, a data center will contribute to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption and greening other industries, like I talked about, like farming, like transport, like buildings, right? Like the healthcare community. It will do that 14 times more than the own energy consumption that it needs, right? So yes, it is consuming energy, but if it can reduce and clean up, the 90% of other industries out there, then we need to make sure that we're using the technologies that this massive engine called data centers is delivering in the cloud. And we need governments to embrace it. And there is a simple mathematical equation that they should look at all the time they create policy. Look at the benefits, look at the risk, and look at the costs. And I assure you that the benefits will always outweigh the other two, and be able to address and reduce the other two. So we should be having policies where we're working with industry and making sure that these technologies can address a very, very important problem that we have to face. And, the clock is ticking, unfortunately, right? We are going to be experiencing water stress in the coming decade. We are going to struggle to feed people and communities across the world. We've seen prices go up. We have logistical and supply chain issues. And all of this stuff, if we don't address it quick enough, will lead to conflict and will lead to political instability. Mm-hmm. So, the green question is not a fad, and it's not a nice thing, and it's not about being ethical or responsible. It is probably the most important question that our human society is facing and must address.
One hard but simple question at the same time: how can people contribute at individual level to these efforts?
I would say the first thing you need to do is to make sure that you're reading up on this problem, right? It is affecting you personally, and you may not know it. And then you should aim to contact your government and encourage them to make sure that the money that's now arriving in the billions for recovery, right, is spent the right way, in a transparent way and focused to drive sustainability. And this twin transition that President van der Leyen has rightly developed, where it's digital and green, should be something that every person needs to knock on the door of their governments and say, I want this to be job number one. This is going to affect me in the future, and this is going to affect my family in the future. And you need to put the right attention to this and let industry, work with you to be able to roll this out and scale out across the EU, and work with your member states. Work together, right? Let the EU project, come together and operate as a single market.
Thank you so much. This was great. We have a long way to go, but we need to go fast, I guess, before we have all these problems haunting us. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add before we close?
No, I just want to, wish this project the best of luck. It is important, and this is a project funded by the EU. So, there are smart and right people in the Commission across the EU that want to do the right thing, right? Let's empower those people in our political governments. Let's make sure that they have the power, to make sure that these type of projects are building awareness on this issue.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
This podcast is brought to you by CYENS, former RISE, the Research Centre of Excellence in Cyprus, focusing on interactive media, smart systems and emerging technologies. For more information, please check our website on cyens.org.cy.